Good morning, everybody. It's coming up to 12 o'clock, and welcome to the Wise Work webinar. Well, this is number 6 in our series of webinars. We've been running these all year, and I'm very pleased to invite our audience to sit back and enjoy the next half an hour of essentially a summary, really, in many ways, of what we've been doing over the year. This is looking at consolidating some of our ideas that we've come up through the year and looking at the process of making smart working, wise working business as usual. Those of you who've been on these webinars before will be familiar with the format. You'll notice there isn't a Q&A box this time, but we do welcome comments, chats. I see we already have Steve Jones saying hello to other people. So as we go through the webinar, I'll keep an eye on the chat box if you have any particular questions. But we're not having a formal Q&A session at the end of this because half an hour is a fairly short time to cover all the things that we'd like to cover as a last webinar. Obviously, this is being recorded, so if you're watching the recording, you don't have a chance of writing anything in the chat box, but you will see other people's comments. So we're talking about consolidation, and this is really the end of the change process that's been going on throughout this year. We've come up with a list of sort of 8 stages of change, based very much on a well-known model by Cotter of leading change. We adapted this a bit, though, to fit our view of the major change that is happening to organizations when they implement smart, flexible, wise working. In fact, one of the problems we often find is that organizations are a bit naive when they start about the amount of change that is involved. They think if it's driven maybe by an office move, it's just a question of a bit of a redesign of office. If it's coming from HR, they might think they need to update their flexible working policies. And if it's technology driven, it's often a question of, well, let's just implement some new technology. And often they find that there's a problem with it being a major change, not just a procedural change, but a culture change. And something we'll focus on a bit in the next half an hour is how we cope with that culture change. So as we've been through the year, we've been through some of these stages. We've talked about getting your stakeholders together. We've talked about getting a clear strategy and a plan. And then as we came through the latter part of the year, we've talked about the need to communicate effectively, to roll out the program, to make sure that people are empowered to act. And then we talked a bit about making sure you run some pilots, getting quick wins from those so that people can learn from it. So what's happening today really is that we're going to look at those last 2 points, bearing in mind that everything we've covered this year is going to end up getting pulled together into an ebook that we're going to produce. So there will be a product coming out at the end of this process to help you and others see how the whole year in the life of a wise working project fits together. But today, what we want to focus on is those last 2 stages, really, of the change process, which is how we consolidate the gains. Now we've really got the program in place. And really, probably the most important thing is making sure that the new ways of working are embedded into the culture. And we're very much going to continue to use the model we've been using of staff, systems, and space, the 3 S's. It's critical that we have those that, where they overlap, that they are collaborating together. More about that later. And then at the end, just a few words about, so where do we go from here? What is the future? What are WiseWorks plans, really, for over the next year? Okay, so let's get started by talking about new ways of working and the culture of organizations. As you all know, culture is one of those rather intangible things. It's best described as maybe the way we do things around here, which is often not very definite. What we've done is used the model which I put into my book, which is, if those of you familiar with it, talks about a kind of type A and a type B culture. We came up with 25 factors that describe the type A, which is very much the traditional command and control, top-down hierarchical culture, versus the type B, which is the more empowered, trusting, engaging culture, which provides a good environment, a supportive environment for the kind of change we're talking about. So what we've done is produced a tool that has a questionnaire which we've used on several senior teams, for example, to get the individuals to fill it in, to say first, where do you think your current culture is at the moment? They usually are reasonably in agreement about that, but often that comes up with some interesting observations. And then where would you like it to be? And invariably, you end up with a bit of a gap. So the example we have here is a typical analysis that you might have from a senior team, where you're looking at the gaps between what they say they have and what they would like to be. And so you can look at those areas where there's a biggest gap and say, right, how are you going to practically now move from being a type A to a type B culture? It's always quite easy for senior managers to say, well, of course we want to engage people. Of course we want to have an environment where people are motivated. But actually, practically, when it comes down to something simple like decision making, who makes the decisions around here? Do they have to have them signed off by all sorts of levels, or are employees actually trusted to make the decisions on their own? Very often, organizations talk about trust. So, of course, we have a trusting culture. Then you say, well, how much authority does the person at the coalface actually have? And you realize that they have very little. Oh, well, we couldn't actually trust them with the company's money. And some classic examples of organizations that have now given the frontline people, hotels who've given the whole porter ability to make decisions that might cost the organization £1,000 or more. But trusting that they're not going to abuse that. They're actually going to recognize they're being trusted and being treated like adults. A lot of this, in the end, this philosophy comes down to, if you treat people like adults, they'll act like adults, and if you treat them like children, they'll act like children. That's a bit simplistic, but so what we do with this tool is make culture into something more tangible and really get organizations to focus on the way culture impacts new ways of working. And another aspect is teamwork. So often we hear people saying, oh, well, teams are fine as long as they're co-located, but the minute you have people just on flexible time, so they're not in the office all the same time, never mind they're working from home or working remotely, how do you make sure you have an effective team? And what we do is take advantage of the fact that introducing new ways of working is really a catalyst for a team to have a good discussion about how we work together. Something they probably should have had, many many times before, but they haven't bothered. They just kind of turn up to work and get on with things. Now they're forced to stop and think about, well, how do we communicate and collaborate? How do we get to cover people when they're not going to be available or not in the office? How do we provide our customers with the service that they need at the right times of day? And managers are often very nervous about introducing new ways of working to their teams, where they know that that they're going to have some times when people will be less available than others. The thing we often hear is, well, if I give my people freedom to work when and where they want to, everybody will want Friday off, and we won't be able to service our customers on Friday. And our answer is, well, you go through the team process, you sit down with the individuals in the team and see, is that true? And if really everybody did want Friday off, which is probably quite unusual, then you would come up with a rota between the team members as to who gets which Friday off and so on, and people would agree it with each other. And the great thing we found here is that the team then owns the solution, not the manager, the team. So if somebody wants to change their pattern of work, instead of going and saying to the manager, please, can I have Wednesday off because it's my child's sports day, something, they go to a colleague and say, look, can I swap shifts with you because I need some time off here. Can you cover me then? I'll cover that. No, they kind of own the solution. So a very practical example of treating people like adults, giving them responsibility. So you can't really read the detail here, but there's a 6-stage process. We have a whole sort of manual for managers on how you run a team process to have this discussion. In some ways, it's best being facilitated by an external person, that may be an HR, OD type person, could be a consultant, just to make sure that conversation goes well and that the manager is really listening to the needs of his or her team. So teamworking, great opportunity for consolidating the ideas of smart working. Again, managers will maybe buy into the ideas, but it's the practicalities that really matter. And we've been involved with a whole series of examples as we've gone through, where we've made sure that this whole staff space systems drivers have to all fit together. Often a change is coming from one or other of these angles, and it's important that the person coming in from, say, a systems point of view takes account of staff and space, and vice versa. And it's when embedding this stuff into the organization that it's important that happens. Let's give you a couple of examples, maybe. We've worked with a HR department in quite a large government agency who wanted to make sure they became the employer of choice, as we all do. And so they said, right, let's have a broad range of agile working options. But what they didn't do then was stop and think about the implications elsewhere. They didn't go through a process of identifying the stakeholders for this change. So what happened? The IT department found that all of a sudden there were people asking for a whole need of laptops and smartphones, but they didn't have the budget for it. So the program sort of came to a halt over that. And then the facilities management people suddenly had to make quite considerable changes to the office layout, because now people wanted more team-based areas and less individual desks. And this is happening as it happened during a very busy period. That's one example. I mean, another example we have is where there was a facilities manager who was really involved in a great property rationalization program. They said, right, we're going to have these team-based areas in our sales offices. We want fewer desks. Salespeople are out a lot of the time anyway, and people will be happy to staff share. Unfortunately, they didn't really consult the staff on this. So what happens, of course, is that there's no awareness amongst the teams. Some sales teams suddenly came in the office to find the next day that they were sharing desks. They didn't even know about it. And in fact, in that case, the interesting thing that happened was that they ended up taking a lot of their paperwork home because they didn't like this new desk layout. And for salespeople, it's quite practical for them to work from home. But this hadn't been thought through at all. So they ended up keeping confidential client records at home rather than in the office. And in fact, there weren't full records in the office. So never mind it being a data protection security issue, it was, from a very practical point of view, it meant that other people couldn't access the records because a lot of it was still paper-based. There's another example we have of it was an IT support services company where they had a small team of internal IT staff, and they decided, the MD really said, right, let's have a new work styles program, he called it, and really a mixture of on the move, home working, and some third party offices, a hub. And so off they went. The IT team went out and bought large amounts of laptops, smartphones, all the remote system stuff, and so on. did it really on their own. They didn't ask for guidance from HR or facilities management or finance or anybody else. They didn't give any thought really to how the staff actually worked, or what they really needed. It was just kind of techie driven. And so all of a sudden, staff get all this new technology and think, oh, this is very well, but I'm not quite sure how I work with this. And all of a sudden, their desks started to get disappear at the same time. And there was a kind of assumption that people would just automatically turn from a static worker into a mobile worker because they got the technology. And of course, the result was a fair amount of chaos. And people were really not sure, they were stuck between the old world of rigid working and the new world of mobile working, weren't quite sure where they were supposed to be working. So until somebody stopped and thought, this is not a technology implementation, this is a human and facilities implementation, that all of a sudden they kind of pulled these three circles together. So what lessons have we really learned from this? Well, first one obviously is make sure that the stakeholders are really involved. So everybody concerned. We usually advise that there's an implementation team which consists of often a senior line manager chairing it, but it consists of HR and maybe learning development people included in that, IT systems people, and then real estate and facilities managers, particularly if it involves acquiring new buildings, changing, not just redesigning workspace, but often there's a physical move involved as well. And then often we find, of course, that what ends up driving the process is, right, we're moving to the new building next April, so that's when everything has to be in place. And the bricks and mortar or steel and glass project drives everything else, to the extent that the systems aren't really in place, the training, the staff are not ready, the culture hasn't been addressed, and so on. But they've got a move coming, so they're going to move regardless. And it's important that the whole timing of these things is synchronized as much as possible. And then making sure we really effectively communicate with people, because people hear about new ways of working. They maybe have friends, relatives they talk to who are flexibly working in some way, and all implementations of smart working are different. So it's kind of important that it's understood by all the different parts of the organization. But obviously, the budgets, the investment in staff, systems, and space has to be balanced. So often, as I say, we see it being a systems project. They've got the budget, and there's no budget for training people, or there's a real estate budget, but there's no budget for the technology, and so on. And the technology, I think we kind of assume these days often now, particularly with younger generation, that, well, the technology is just there and works. And yes, it is, but for work in a consistent way, even with things like bring your own device, still means that people have to have thought through how the technology is going to get effectively used in flexible working. Okay. So let's have another look at a tool that we use in analyzing new ways of working. What we try and make sure is that if an organization says we want to have a flexible leadership style, we want to trust people, we want to behave and see managers particularly behaving in this way, we then look at what's enabling or disabling that. What policies, what practices, what procedures are there? And so you might look at the HR policies and say, do they really support mobile working, for example? Are there policies that get in the way of individuals being able to choose when and where they work? Because there's a time recording system that people have to record the hours they work, and working at home is difficult to do that, or people don't get the ability to tick boxes which they do in the office to register where they are and so on. So there's often, as I say, time management type of systems that can be used remotely, although if you're running an organization where you're measuring results, then you're not trying to measure too much time. So checking out the various policies, procedures, practices against what you meant to achieve is a useful way when you're consolidating and checking out, have we actually got the outcomes? It's really going back saying, what outcomes do we want from this system? Now let's check that we've got them. And if we haven't, look at what is it that's impairing the way. And one of the things that sets out the plan for getting the targets in place, the outcomes that you want, is a roadmap. And we use this with leadership teams quite often, looking at how can you identify all those individual items that have to happen down this plan. There's the obvious thing, there's the date of the office move, there's the date of the implementation of the new IT system and so on. But what are all the dependencies from that? It's project management in a way. But what we do with leadership teams, and there's an example here, it's not very clear, but it's a photograph of a real timeline done with a management team where they've put on the yellow post-it notes the different things that need to happen in order to make the smart working work. And they've done it along the timeline, and you can see that it's their writing, it's their timeline. They kind of own it as a team. So this is and done often with not done with the project management team, who would have a project plan anyway, but done with the line managers, the senior management team, who need to kind of understand all the major change that's going to happen. Again, back to the argument that implementing smart working is more than just a change in policies, practices, technology, office layout, and so on. It is a culture change, and the senior team really have to be able to understand that one. So, what are we doing about this? We've given you a flavour here of some of the tools that WiseWork has in place to be able to implement this stuff. We've had, so if you look at this, a flavour of our approach to consulting. We've been doing this, I've lost track, for 20 plus years easily, and we got to the stage of thinking, maybe we ought to be sharing some of these tools, techniques, a bit more with other people, not just kind of relying on our own wisdom, charm, presence to deliver our product. So we're in the process of packaging up some of these initiatives, the ones we know that work, into a toolkit. So there's a kind of wise working set of questionnaires, advice, and so on, that we can deliver, or we can actually deliver through other people who work with us. We've got a lot of intellectual property we've built up over the years. I know, having written a book, it's amazing the amount of knowledge you find you have, which in the end goes into writing a book. So we're writing the ebook as a result of this process, which will have some of the tools highlighted in it. And then what we're doing is looking to work with a small group of associates who can work with us to sort of grow the market, grow the product, grow the market, if you like, and somehow share with them the value of what we have to offer. Still early days. We're not about to produce a whole set of tools that we license out to people or whatever. We're very much saying we want to work with a slightly extended group of associates. We already work with a number, but it's a question of looking at working through other people as much as working directly with the client, always ourselves. So that's the proposition. And I guess part of that is that the future is ours to create. I talk a lot about the future of work, and talk about we talk about the gig economy. We talk about the Uberization of work, where work is moving from the big corporate fixed organizations, moving from the jobs and the careers in the big hierarchical companies through to work being much more a set of individual tasks which are done by individual contributors who are gathered together to produce a result. This is the networked organization of the future. And having talked a lot about this at conferences, I thought, actually, Wise Work ought to be one of these as well, really, because in a way we are exactly that. We are a small consultancy, but we network with other people. And if the future is all about small businesses or individuals connecting together through the internet, and Uber being the obvious example of an app connecting somebody with a need, I want to get from A to B, and somebody with a product, I can drive a car, then it seems like the future is all about providing these sort of connections. And as a company that's in this business of helping people to implement the work of the future, it seems like an opportunity for us to do that ourselves through working with associates. And we're also very conscious of the fact that the world of work has moved from one that's very physical to one that is much more virtual using technology. So much more is done on social media, for example, that we think, obviously using a webinar is a good example of doing exactly that. The people attending today, thank you for coming. You haven't had to get in a car or get on a train or drive somewhere to go and listen to somebody for an hour or so. And we see this as something we will continue to do in the future to help to get our message out. There's still ultimately no replacement for the face-to-face contact. So we still will have, as a company, we will still have a sort of face-to-face relationship with clients, particularly managers who are nervous about perhaps using the technology. But we think we ought to be a good example of using technology ourselves as we go on into the future. Hence, we have a Wise Work Twitter account, obviously we have a website, and so on. And we will, as I say, continue to contribute through various social media. We're coming up to the half-hour mark now, so I just want to say it's been a great year because we started this process back with our first webinar back in January. We've spread them out through the year, and we've enjoyed doing this. It's been a bit of a discipline helping us stop and think about what we do and documenting and packaging the service that we provide. So it's been a good way of putting our knowledge together. It's amazing how you find that you've got a lot of knowledge which is somehow in your head and you're not always good at sharing it. We're going to do our best in future to share that through our tool set and make sure that Wise Work continues to influence and lead the world of work. So whether you're watching this live or through the video recording, thank you very much, and good luck with your future of work, and I hope you work wisely in the future. Goodbye.